Dear fellow Tamers and Digidestined, it's Mike, aka Sinaku from Overground, and welcome to the final episode of the 1.5 Rainbow series. If you're unfamiliar with the channel or unfamiliar with the series, first of all, hey there, welcome to Overground. Thanks for finding us. And secondly, the Rainbow series is something we do every time a new set releases, where we just take everything that we pulled out of our own personal packs or personal boxes, combine it with our own personal card pool, and we just build one deck of every color as kind of a starting base to kind of get our feet in the door on the new meta and kind of get an idea for how new decks play or how new cards play. And usually we build these decks based off our favorite strategies, our favorite Digimon, or even just our favorite archetypes in general. And we're going to be going over the final color in the spectrum of the Rainbow series now, and that's going to be the color black. So up to this point, we've covered the red Omni deck, we've covered the yellow Shine Greymon deck, we've covered the blue All-Force Vidramon deck, we covered the purple Mastamon deck, the green Ruste Renamon deck that was upgraded with 1.5, and finally we're landing on the color black, which brings us full circle and completes the series as a whole. So black in 1.0 was primarily focused around using the black War Greymon, not to be confused with Black War Greymon, but the War Greymon who is the color black in the card art, not art rather, but border, to kind of facilitate strong security +1 checks that constantly kind of swung in and then turtled back. So you would attack, and then you would get very strong security checks in because you would likely have jamming, have security attack +1, depending on how you built your stack. And then you would kind of turtle back because he would reboot, and then he would also be a blocker. So he was kind of your primary win condition in 1.0 because he was your main attacker and defender. You could also follow up with something like High Andromon, which was a 12,000 attacker. And you could kind of build kind of a pseudo Millenniumon turbo build as well. And that's the approach we took in the Rainbow series last time. This time, though, the name of the game is pretty much CresGarurumon. He's kind of the main boss of the deck now, and he kind of facilitates a lot of neat little combos that we're going to talk about as well. So let's go ahead and get into the deck list. So the 4 eggs to start off with is actually Kaporimon, and I think this is probably one of the first decks in which I'm not going to say, oh wow, this is a great addition to the deck based on the egg card pool in 1.5, because the Digi-Egg as a whole in 1.5 for black specifically hasn't actually changed. We still play the 4 Kaporimon because he's actually the best one that they have, which is if this Digimon has reboot, it gains +1000. And then the last Digi-Egg that we play now is actually Kakenmon as opposed to Sumamon, which is more reserved for kind of strictly Diobarmon builds. And Kakenmon just reads, when this Digimon is level 7, when attacking you get to gain 1 memory. Now this is more reserved for something like Ragnarlordmon builds. And while Ragnarlordmon Black is a very powerful deck in its own right, it's not something we decided to cover today because we want to have the focus on CresGarurumon because he's one of my favorite Digimon as well, and I love the entire Alter S combination that he creates with Blitz Greymon. So I love that they kind of all come together all at once in 1.5. Now we're going to move on to the rookies. So we're playing 4 Toy Agumon, pretty much a staple for black right now because it gives everything that it evolves on top of it. Reboot, as we'll kind of get through the remainder of the deck, is kind of the heart and soul keyword of black. It's kind of what makes everything kind of run, and it's kind of what we're basing our entire strategy on at this point in time. It's a very much, again, a strategy of kind of going in, taking quick hits, going back to our turn, rebooting our Digimon, and preventing them from being attacked on the back crack, which allows us to constantly keep our board presence and forces our opponent to only deal with our board through straight removal, which we have more options to counter that as well. So it's kind of the counterplay for the counterplay for the counterplay. So black kind of becomes this big brain kind of chess sort of mentality now as we go into 1.5. Moving on, 4 Gatsumon. 4 I feel is a little excessive right now, but it combos well with CresGarurumon when we finally get to talk about him. But it gives us a good blocker to bring out really early on. We're going to next have 3 Commandramon. Honestly, this could be either or Commandramon or Kagurumon, but Commandramon is new. He looks cooler. So yeah, he's in the deck right now. And then we're finally rounding out the rookies with 2 Caramon and 1 Chumon. Now, this rookie lineup is subject to change, and it's only kind of based on what I currently have available to me in my own personal card pool. And that's because I only own 2 of this promo Caramon right now. If I had a full set, I'd likely be playing a full set. And then that would likely be counteracted. Like, we'd probably be playing multiple Chumon, and then probably maybe no Commandramon at all, and maybe the full set of Caramon. But I just wanted to kind of round out the deck with some different names and have more variety right now as the first draft to test it out. Chumon, again, it could be cut for even a 4th Commandramon at this point in time. It's just here as kind of a tech option depending on the different matchups that you're going to be going up against, and it has synergy with the deck already because you can evolve over top of Digi-Egg and have it in play, or you can evolve over top of it when you're done using it. And that just prevents your opponent from gaining memory through any effects other than Tamers. But the Caramon I want to talk about real quick because the Caramon has the inheritable where on your opponent's turn, the Digimon that evolved over top of it, it gets +1000. And that's very important when we talk about the overall blocker strategy that black is as a whole, because not only does black Is Black super reliant on the reboot keyword? It's also super reliant on the blocker keyword, because it's the one color in the game where a lot of the Digimon actually have that blocker keyword, and there's more blockers available to this color right now as of 1.5 as there are any other colors currently in the game. So the ability to have multiple blockers in play and have that extra buff with Garurumon allows you to kind of have a lot easier time protecting yourself against your opponent's threats, which means they have to work a little bit harder to kind of evolve a little bit higher to deal with it. It also is a counter to Shine Greymon specifically, because that 1000 boost could potentially mean that your opponent needs to burn an additional Tamer to get over one of your Digimon. Like look at Craniumon, for example, who's 12,000. Craniumon is kind of the main counter to removal cards and that sort of aggression. So by giving him 13,000 DP, that means the opponent needs to have 4 Tamers as opposed to 3 to be able to out this Craniumon through their own Shine Greymon evolution. So it's kind of a bit of a metacall and a metagaming philosophy when it comes to deck building. But at the end of the day, this Garurumon could be replaced for any other rookie. It could be another pair of Garurumon if you just want extra 2-drops. It could be more copies of Digimon, kind of depending on what your local and regional metagame is looking like and what you're expecting to see at tournaments. As for the rookies, a bit of a complicated side tangent on the rookies there, but I feel it's just necessary to talk about because this deck is built the way it is based on what I'm seeing on a regular basis at my own tournaments. Now we're going to be going on to our champions. For Greymon, Fist Greymon is the best card in the deck, in my opinion, because it gives everybody with reboot jamming, and pretty much everyone at our top end is going to be having reboot, or we're going to be giving them reboot to some capacity as well, which is very powerful. So it allows us to swing in with our Digimon with impunity, make sure they do not destroy those security checks, and then when we do end up getting them with reboot back into an unsuspended phase, it means our opponent cannot attack over them, and again, it lets us get those extra security checks into another turn as well, allowing us to be constantly putting the pressure on our opponent. And then we're playing a 3-2 split of 3 Numemon and 2 Tankmon. Tankmon is another new addition for 1.5. He's a new 1-cost evolution drop with that 6k threshold that we've seen in other previous Digimon, such as like Gorillmon and Dark Tyrannomon in Vegemon and other colors as well. So Black actually never got this, so now they finally do in 1.5. The reason I'm playing 3 Numemon instead of extra copies of Tankmon is because as much as I hate Numemon just on principle, on the concept of him completely, I can't deny the fact that he only costs 3 to hard play, and in a deck that is very reliant on evolution and getting to the end of my evolutionary chains, getting a level 4 in play ASAP to kind of skip the middleman on a rookie is actually very impactful. However, I won't deny that the 6k for Tankmon is very strong as well, because this lets us play against certain cards like Alter S, who tried to de-digivolve our board and destroy anything with under 5,000. So having a 6,000 level 4 means that we kind of stick at this spot and we don't lose our Digimon to go down any further. Then you're going to see here, again, we're kind of coming the theme of, I only own one of this card, so this is kind of what it would have been replaced with. And that's 2 copies of Garurumon and 1 copy of the promo Kurosarymon. If I had 2 more copies of the Kurosarymon, I likely would have, this spot would have been 3 full Kurosarymon completely. The DP reduction here for 2,000 is negligible when you take into consideration the fact that this Digimon can actually attack. One of the big downsides of Garurumon is that while it is powerful in the 7,000 DP slot, it was a huge hindrance, because even though you could have enough attackers on board to finish off your opponent, if one of them was Garurumon and you didn't have enough memory or have the evolutionary piece in hand to actually evolve over him to finish off your opponent, you're always just stuck with 1 attack short. And having the Kurosarymon instead gives us an additional level 4 blocker that we can put into play either off our CresGarurumon or off our natural evolutionary paths to stay alive, that we can potentially attack with against our opponent to finish them off if it happens to be our final attacker in our row. And that's going to move on to our ultimates. And we're just playing a very great package here, just 4 Metal Greymon and 4 Andromon. A 4 Metal Greymon, again, to combo with the Greymon here, one of the best cards in Black, depending on how you want to build your stack. You're generally going to want to keep at least one of these under them at any given point in time. And this is what gives, it has reboot natively, and it what gives any further Digimon with reboot that evolves on top of him security attack +1. And again, it continues to add on that layer of aggression and continues to give our Digimon with reboot more capacity to just power through our opponent's security. And the 4 Andromon, this gives us another blocker to evolve to as we need to, but it's also here at 4 copies so that we can get it off of CresGarurumon to put another free blocker into play to protect us even further. And then rounding off our ultimates, we're playing 1 copy of Inframon. Again, this is mostly because I just own 1 copy, but mostly also because I want to test it out at 1 first to see if I actually liked it. And this is just because on play we can trigger De-Digivolve 1 and one of our opponent's Digimon, and it's something that we can get off of CresGarurumon as well, and it will trigger the on-play ability. So it's just something I want to fool around with, and if I like it, I'll keep it. If not, maybe it'll get replaced for something else. Options right now are likely going to be the Metal Mamemon for 1.5. This is the rare on Digivolve We get to return a level 7 Virus Digimon from our trash to our hand. This is likely what's going to be replacing Infamon if we end up deciding that it just isn't cutting it. And this is very powerful because we can get back our level 7s like Millenniumon, which we'll talk to. And there are other options as well now for Black that we'll get to as we near the end of the deck list. And then this Digimon also has Reboot by default, which goes hand in hand with a lot of other powerful cards that we're going to be talking about. So now I keep talking about something I can get off CresGarurumon, something I can get off CresGarurumon, but I haven't actually talked about what CresGarurumon does. So let's talk about the boy right now. So he has Reboot natively, he costs 4 to Digivolve, and he can Digivolve on top of a black or red Digimon. Normally, that feels like a detriment, because 9 times out of 10, especially with Memory Gainer Tamers, you're generally only starting your turn with 3. However, as we'll talk about later on as we get to the course of the deck list, and you can kind of see the Joe poking out here, we can potentially start our turn with 4 or more every turn, which allows us to get our CresGarurumon into play, put us to 0, and not end our turn. But if it does force us to end our turn, putting Digivolving into CresGarurumon isn't the end of the world, and I'll explain why. So when Digivolving, we get to reveal the top card of our deck for each Digimon that our opponent has in play. So that means, you know, if they have 2 Digimon in play, we'll look at the top 2. If they have 5, we'll look at the top 5. And for every card that we look at, we can pick 1 black or red Digimon with level 5 or less among them and put it into play for free, and then put the bottom that we reveal in our deck in any order. So this is very powerful because it allows us to bring out blockers specifically, because it allows us to extend our board in a way that can counter our opponent's ability to attack us. It allows us to bring cards that have very important effects into play that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to draw into, such as like Metal Greymon. Like Greymon, for example, as well. And we can hit the Infamon as well, and start kind of setting them back. CresGarurumon is very important, and I feel is a really cool addition to Black as a whole, because it allows Black to go a little bit wider for a much smaller memory investment, and that going wide can potentially snowball into much bigger and better things, depending on what else you actually have in your hand or what else you have access to. And 3 CresGarurumon, I think, is the perfect number for now, just as I kind of learned how to navigate this format and how to build this deck to its full optimal potential. And then we're going to round out our megas. We have 2 copies of the black bordered War Greymon, not to be confused with the new black War Greymon in 1.5, and 2 copies of Craniumon. So the War Greymon, we already know exactly what he does. He's got Reboot, he's got Blocker, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Depending on how we build the stack that he evolves into, that basically determines his level of power. Craniumon, on the other hand, he doesn't have Reboot natively, but we can give it to him with Toyokamon if we build him properly, but he does have Blocker. So having additional 11k and 12k Blocker respectively in your deck is very powerful, because it means that it deters your opponent from attacking from much smaller Digimon, and it kind of forces them to go into a giant mega or more of their own to counter your own very large blocker. But the thing that makes Craniumon kind of stand out is that it gives all Digimon with your blocker protection from destruction effects. And that's very powerful, because now your blocker can no longer just be popped with a single Skull Greymon. You know, it can't be destroyed with a Gaia Force. It can't be destroyed with Omnimon, either regular or Ultra S. So these are just a few minor examples that are coming off the top of my head right now, but it's very powerful in the sense that it just allows your stuff to remain on the field, and it allows your opponent to not be able to cheat their way to bypass their blocker. So the only way to destroy your blocker now is to literally plow through it, and that's very, very, very strong. And then we're going to round out the deck with the level 7s, which are 2 Millenniumon. And the only reason 2 Millenniumon are in this deck right now is because the 2 Ultra S are already spoken for in the red Omnimon deck, so I wouldn't be able to build both and have both available in each deck at the same time. However, if you do choose to use Ultra S in this deck, feel free. It is still a very powerful Digimon, and arguably is even more powerful than Millenniumon at this time. And again, this adds credence to swapping the Infamon for that Metal Mamemon, because now if any of these are in your security early on, you can use the Metal Mamemon to actually fetch this back out of your discard pile and use it at a later point. However, Millenniumon himself is still very powerful as well. It allows you to put a Digimon on the bottom of the deck, just instant removal that bypasses any sort of destruction prevention. So like, for example, this would actually be a hard out to Craniumon, ironically, if you were playing the mirror match. But if you have access to Ultra S, I would say play Ultra S. If you're trying to play a bit more budget version, then stick with the Millenniumon for now, just as your big bad kind of extra removal boss monster. Next, we're going to go on to the options of the Tamers. So we'll talk about the Tamers first, because you can kind of see them poking out here. We're playing 2 of the 1.0 tie. This is the one where on your opponent's turn, your Digimon get that extra 1,000, similar to the Caramon effect. So just having multiple effects like that, add that extra layer of redundancy, that all stack up, gives your blockers a lot bigger, a lot higher numbers on your opponent's turn that they have a more difficult time dealing with. And this, again, is a counter to more like Shine Greymon strategies, because the higher our blockers are, the more increments of 1,000 that go over each 4,000 increment that we can reach, reach means that our opponent need to burn an additional Tamer to get rid of our Digimon. Because unfortunately, Shine Greymon gets rid of our Craniumon through something like game mechanics, for example, because reducing DP to 0 is not considered a destruction effect. And then finally, our Tamer lineup, we're playing one of the new Joe from 1.5, and this Joe is really cool. So at the start of our turn, if we have Digimon with blocker in play, we just gain 1 memory. So because we're playing so many blockers, we have so many ways to get blockers into play. This means that in combination with Tai, we could potentially starting our turn at 4 memory every single time. You know, you're low. So the options, this is kind of a flex spot. You could play different options again depending on what you're seeing regularly at your tournaments or at your, and for 3 cost, because we're going to 3 usually with Tai, and depending on how we built our board, this can be the one card we play for turn that kind of turns the entire tide of the game around. And what this card does is that all of our Digimon with blocker or reboot get security attack +1. So again, we've talked about how we would normally build up our stacks with the Metal Greymon as well. And by just circumstance, or by how we've built the deck, the majority of our Digimon have either blocker or reboot or a combination of both. And what this does is that Beast Cyclone actually rewards us for being even more aggressive by giving every single one of those Digimon an extra security check, which means we can swing in with even more Digimon with reboot and or blocker, rip as many security cards as possible from our opponent, and then have them all reboot into an unsuspended state, which means our opponent cannot attack over them on their next turn to attempt to get rid of them, which means we are free to attack with them again on the next turn and potentially wipe out our opponent's security and win the game. And the last option we're playing is one Breath of the Gods. And again, I talk about Shine Greymon a lot because I run into a lot of Shine Greymon in my own local tournaments. It gives one of the Digimon the following effect. This Digimon can't have its DP reduced or be returned to the owner's hand or deck until the end of your opponent's next turn. This means that we can have our Digimon, if we have a Craniumon out, for example, we can make this Craniumon not only ineligible for destruction through card effects, but also ineligible to be reduced to 0 through something like Shine Greymon or any other DP reducing card in yellow. It can be unable to return to the hand with something like Positron Laser or Coccidus Breath, and it can be unable to return to the deck through something like Millenniumon, for example, or Terrace Clusters if anyone still plays that. So Breath of the Gods just makes your blocker completely hexproof, if you're familiar with the term for Magic, just completely unaffected by literally anything that the game can throw at it. And the only way, again, to deal with it is to just plow right through it. But the other reason we're playing Breath of the Gods is because it has a neat little security effect that is way different than its main effect. And it reads, your opponent's Digimon can't attack players for the turn. So if this gets flipped in your security, it essentially ends the entire battle phase of your opponent because they can no longer attack with any more of their Digimon if they're trying to go after your security. And I thought that was a little bit too good to pass up. But that is it. That is my first draft on the Black CresGarurumon deck for 1.5. I look forward to testing this out and seeing what I like and what I don't like, and bringing you guys the results through gameplay videos or otherwise. But if you have any suggestions or thoughts on how you would change this deck or improve it, let me know in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you like this series, if you like what we do here at Overground, feel free to give this video a thumbs up and please consider subscribing. But until then, this has been Mike, aka Sanaku. This is it for the Rainbow series for 1.5, and I look forward to bringing you the next Rainbow series when we get the next set for Digimon card game, which will be BT4 Great Legend. So we'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.